Welcome to the Retiring Well podcast. My name is Charlie Jordan. I'm your host, and I am so glad you joined me today. Our mission here at Retiring Well is simple. We want to help you do just that, to retire well. We're going to look at more than just the money and examine multiple aspects of life in retirement and how your wealth can be used to improve your life and the life of others. This is Retiring Well. Hey everyone, it's Charlie. I'm excited to share this episode with you. This is the latest in our Women Retiring Well series, and my guest today is going to be Jane. Jane is a fellow partner of mine at CI Private Wealth. She's also an advisor at Region Atlantic in Morristown, New Jersey. And when I think about high-level executive women, I knew Jane by reputation before I actually knew her. Jane has had a lengthy career in working with families and individuals, but in particular has developed this specialty in helping women who are in high-level careers transition throughout their career and also into retirement. Jane founded in 2010 the Region Atlantic Wall Street Women Forum and has become really an icon in some ways in our industry for working with high-level executive women. Jane's going to drop a number of truth bombs in this conversation. I tried my best to recap them at the end, but I really do hope you enjoy this conversation with Jane Newton. Well, Jane Newton, it is so good to have you with me today on the Retiring Well podcast. Welcome.
Charlie, thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited about today's conversation on retiring well.
Well, I am as well. And, one of the things that we want to do today is obviously focus on women retiring well. That's the sort of the series we're in, if you will. But obviously, a lot of what we talk about today is going to cut across men and women. But want to start with your particular story, because as I look at your bio and just get to know you and understand kind of where you came from and how you got to where you are, I think it's something that many of our listeners will really appreciate. So if you can kind of just give us a little bit of a background on your career and kind of how you got to this place, and maybe talk about the Wall Street Women Forum and just kind of really what are the highs and lows maybe of the career, and what does Jane think about when she thinks about what retiring well eventually looks like as well? So that's a lot I got to throw at you, but kind of give me a little bit of a background on where you came from.
Great, Charlie, because as I thought about our conversation today, it is focused on women, but it applies to the men in your audience, I think, as well, or perhaps their partners. My career has been anything but a straight line. I've learned that sometimes you have to zig and zag to get where you want to go. And even as was my case, to places you didn't even imagine. So rather than just kind of go through a bio, I thought I would share 3 key pivot points that I've made along my career journey and a lesson I learned at each shift. Because these lessons I've realized shape the way I advise clients on all sorts of planning topics, for sure, retirement planning. So
Awesome.
I started my career in financial services, but I've always been in financial services. But when I got to college, I didn't join what is known today as wealth management. I started in investment banking at JP Morgan. It was a great place for me to start as an economics major who wanted to learn about business and in my case, be in the Big Apple of New York City. So banking was a perfect place for me to start out. And after about 12 years in investment banking, I made a strategic leap within JP Morgan to wealth management, to private banking. And it was one of the best decisions I made in my career. Charlie, I think you can probably appreciate shifting our focus from the institutional side to advising high net worth families to having a direct impact on those people across the table from us, right? That was, to me, even more rewarding than I had envisioned. So my takeaway from that is You don't have to stay in the same lane your whole career. You can change lanes or make the lanes wider. And as we talk today, I hope I can apply that equally to thinking about and actually transitioning into retirement. You don't have to stay in the same lane. Life intervened for me after 17 years at JP Morgan. I chose to leave my career to be home with my family at a crucial time for us. Today, we call it off-ramping. There was no term for it back then. To me, it felt like stepping off a cliff into something that I didn't know what the bottom was going to be like. And I just hoped that I would land on my feet. It turned out, again, in hindsight, to be one of the best decisions that I made, as it led me to where I am today at Region Atlantic. Restarting my career was really challenging, but a challenge I was up to. And I credit the support of my family and many professional colleagues for making it possible for me to land where I am now.
So Jane, let me ask you a quick question. How long were you, quote, off-ramped before you came back into the fold?
This is perfect because my husband and I had thought it would be, our plan was it would just be a matter of months until we could sort things out in our kids' lives and make sure everybody was in great shape. And those few months turned into 7 years, and really, 7 great years that it's interesting to see how it had an actually positive impact on my kids, as well as returning to work had a positive impact. My kids will tell me now. So it was a lot longer than I had planned. And I think that's exactly my takeaway is have a plan, but write it in pencil. That I think I've realized over a long career that 50% of what happens to us in life is out of our control. And what I focus myself on, but my clients as well, is focus on the things you can control. I mean, look what's going on in the world today. Focus on the things that you can control. And at the same time, I believe that it's important to be able to change course, to take advantage of opportunities that arise. Kind of sounds like retirement. Keep an open mind, be nimble, right? Change course if it's appropriate. And then the third pivot was actually joining Region Atlantic 17 years ago. For me, it was a very big change going from the big firm environment I grew up in to a small firm. But also it's enabled me to thrive in ways I could not have imagined. At a firm like Region Atlantic, I've been able to tap my entrepreneurial side and chose to focus my practice on advising high-level women on Wall Street. So like many, maybe listening to this podcast, accomplished, talented professionals who happen to be women and happen to be working in a field I know pretty well in financial services. In 2010, I launched the Region Atlantic Wall Street Women Forum, and I'm going to share this story because it leads to, again, the way I think about helping clients today. I took on something that had never been done at Region Atlantic. I organized an event that was a very high-end event in New York City with an invitation list that I built from scratch. So we gathered 100 women across Wall Street, as we do every year, with a program designed specifically to help them not just survive, but thrive in what is an ever-changing, continually challenging, and I'll say male-dominated still today, industry. And I had no certainty I could pull this off, Charlie. Lots of naysayers. What if this Jane? What if that Jane? And I just knew there was a thirst for this kind of information among the Wall Street women I know. And 12 years in, we've built a community of 850 women on Wall Street who get together at our events and outside of as well, and some of whom have become clients. So it has been a very enriching experience, and knowing that I can have an impact like that on their careers and personal lives. So my takeaway from that is, go out of your comfort zone, try new things. And for today's discussion, I thought about one of the things we talk about and focus on with women on Wall Street and all professionals is we each have to be the CEO of our own careers, right? We have to own it. We have to take charge. Nobody's going to give you the greatest opportunities. Be the CEO of your own career. And heading in today's conversation, Charlie, I was thinking, be the CEO of your own retirement. You get to design it. You are the one that's going to make it happen in a way that is as fulfilling as it can be for you.
I really, really like that. When I think about retirement, one of the words that comes to mind a lot is this idea of agency.
Mm,
And I've read a book about that before where you're kind of saying, look, there's autonomy where that kind of gives you the ability to make decisions in your best interest. Agency is taking ownership over that. And it's really what you just expressed there. It's being the CEO of your own retirement. And as we've talked about, retirement can take a number of different forms. It's not just the work until you stop working and then just live out the rest of your days. That model still exists, and it may be the route some take, but there's a lot more fits and starts and ebbs and flows, and a lot of variation in how people deal with this idea of retirement. So much so, you and I have talked about whether or not this needs to be redefined, and maybe there's a better word for it. And talk to me about what you are talking about with others in this area.
I love this topic because I ask myself, is the word retirement the one that's appropriate today? I think, the word retirement, when you basically, you worked until you were 65, some magic number that isn't necessarily, scientific or biological. It's just some number that ties to a bunch of other metrics. But you worked till you were 65, and then you retired, and you were lucky if you lived 10 or 15 years, and you quote unquote, sailed off into the sunset. In my, you know, in my work and helping clients get to and through retirement, I've really questioned if one word can possibly capture the different flavors and the different approaches that people take to retirement, the different range of possibilities that I want people to realize is open to them. And I'll say, just like you as a professional, any of us who have careers, you want to remember there's options, and you want to create those options and be open to them as they arise. So as I think about the word retirement, and sometimes when I use it in conversations with clients, there's a very negative, almost people bristle at the word retirement. It conjures up the picture of you sitting in a rocking chair, looking at the sunset, and boy, that sounds lovely, but that's not everybody's vision for 30 years or so of
Right.
retirement.
I mean, I like sitting in a chair looking at the sunset, but it's vacation. It's not every day.
Perfect. And you know what? I think that I've learned through others that retirement is not an all or nothing.
Mhm.
And it's not necessarily for sure at 65. Could be much earlier, could be later, could be earlier than one had planned, voluntarily or not. Lots of things, like you can't control everything in life. Um, I do know that it's very hard for many people to envision what life will look like after retirement. And maybe if I can share an example of what I've come to think of as, it's not retirement, it's rewirement. For many people, it's taking who you are and applying it in a different way, and you may actually continue working in a different way. Can I share an example
Please
of
do.
that?
Yes.
So I have in mind a client who Spent 35 years at one big firm, rose to senior leadership roles, and her husband was and still is working. And she chose to retire at 58. Might scratch our head. Why'd she choose to retire at 58? Could afford to retire, could afford to stop earning money, had lots of things she wanted to do. So she became active in the not for profit community even more than she was. She's on a college board. But she will say in her own words, she failed retirement. We'll get back to that word failed. But she, in her mind, failed retirement. Why is that? She still had way too much energy. She found she had too much time on her hands, that were getting filled with things that just maybe wasn't as an intentional way of spending her time as she wanted. And like many others, missed a bit of structure in their day. Maybe not having to go through the daily grind and the commute and the office politics, but missed a bit of structure. She ended up, after about 2 years, quote unquote, at home, out of not working full time, she ended up joining two of her former colleagues in a startup in the same general industry that they were in, and is more busy working today than she had planned. It's become at least a full time job again, but she's so energized. And so I think this is a great example of reinventing ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and perhaps in ways we hadn't envisioned, because in her case, an opportunity came her way, and she thought about it. She thought, "I'm really good at this. I'm up for it," and it's turned out pretty well. I think that compares drastically to our view of a traditional retirement, and 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 it's right for her. It's right for her at this time.
Yeah, that's really good. I keep coming back to this, your story, and your story is like many women that were in the professional world. You had a career, and then you made a decision to stay home for a period of time. That decision oftentimes ends up maybe being longer than anticipated, and then had to pivot back. And I think in many cases, women are more prepared for what modern retirement looks like today than maybe some of the men have been. Because I think many men over traditional periods of time, because retirement is kind of still a young institution if you think about it. You used to work until you could get your full pension, and then by that time you're just tired. You've been doing the same thing because you kind of have this one track mind, and that is hard. And you mentioned one of the first things you do, you said was you don't have to stay in the same lane. Well, the traditional corporate environment was you stay in the same lane so you can get the maximum benefit by staying in the same lane. And I think what happens there, like anything that puts stress on one thing over and over, something breaks. And eventually people said, I'm done. I just want to be done. And many times what people need to do is not be done. They just need to go do something different. And I think many women have actually experienced that. They've experienced what that transition looks like from leaving or off ramping, as you mentioned, and then having to on ramp back on and in many ways reinvent themselves. I'm sure 7 years passed for you. I'm sure the workplace changed a lot in seven
Sure
years.
did.
Not only did you go from a large firm to a small firm, but culture changed and everything else. And I think that women are more, maybe even experienced in this type of transition than maybe many of the men have been conditioned to be. Maybe not so much anymore for the younger generations because many people change jobs over and over again. But you think about our baby boomer generation, who's kind of the main retirement group right now. Many of them have been sort of conditioned. If they didn't unfortunately get a layoff, you work until you get the pension. You work until you get the full benefit, and then you're just exhausted and you're just ready to be done. And I think now what's happening is workplace itself is so fluid that people are making maybe different decisions about it. It's actually one of the reasons I call what we do retiring well. It still has that retirement word in it, but the idea it's a process, not a point in time,
Oh, I love that.
and that we are constantly changing with this, that it is going to be a journey. It's not going to be the end point. And I think our industry, unfortunately, Jane, and this is my soapbox I've been on for many years, our industry has focused people on the retirement date. Get there. This is the whole focal point, is getting to this arbitrary date that may not even work for most people. And instead, what we're trying to do is help people evaluate really what they want to do with their lives and take agency over it to be able to make the best decisions that they can for that entire journey.
I love the notion it's a journey, not a destination. And I think it's about it as it's a marathon, not a sprint. And again, you may zig and zag and go off the track, so to speak. So I don't know how to generalize whether men who are closer to retirement age or whatever, let's just call it 50s, 60s, whether they are still in that one lane corporate track more or less than women. I think everybody's
Probably less than it used to
Yes,
be,
I
I would
think
assume. Yeah.
everybody's eyes have been open to, it's not always in our control. But also, there's a lot of interest in trying new things, building out a portfolio of skills, joining startups, starting a startup, doing your own thing, especially during the pandemic. And I think that as I think about, so what is retirement? I came back to a quote someone shared with me a while ago, which is retirement is when you get to be the person you always wanted to be.
Mm.
What gets in the way of becoming the person you always wanted to be? We all can dream and maybe should be encouraged to dream a little bit. What is that person I want to be? And for today's discussion, is it different for women than men? And I think my answer is it is and it isn't. It can be and maybe not so much. So some of the things I have in mind, I think are just as applicable to men thinking about heading into and maybe going through their retirement years. And one of the biggest challenges I find for working people is this notion of who am I going to be when I leave the working world? What's this identity? I don't have a job title anymore. I don't have, a whole slew of people I manage. I can't, be, I think that's basically how do I feel important? And a word that I know resonates a lot with women, relevant and
Mm.
productive. And, it's the proverbial you're at a cocktail party or you're standing in line at the supermarket and you meet someone and you stumble over, I'm Jane Newton. There's nothing else to follow it. I'm not the CEO of something. I'm no longer, a partner or a wealth advisor or whoever, a doctor or whatever it is. I'm just me. And that is a really scary notion for a lot of people.
Let me ask a question on that. You mentioned that the word relevant is something that really strikes women. Why is that the case? Why is that word such a buzzword?
It's come up a lot over the years with the kind of talented women that I tend to work with and that the forum is designed for. And, Wall Street in particular is a young person's environment, but it's not true. It's not that that's the only industry like that. It's about you have constantly new people, new thoughts, new skills you should get exposed to, and you need to feel like you're still relevant, that you haven't, in particular, unfortunately for women, you haven't aged out, that you still have something important to contribute, that you can stay fresh. And I think about it as getting ahead of the curve, right? If you keep doing the same things you've always been doing, the world's going to pass you by. And for women, that's particularly frightening in many ways. I'm not saying it doesn't motivate men to stay fresh. But I think that in many cases, especially in corporate America, you know, women as they age, they get kind of pushed aside and, leave it the whole notion during COVID about is it okay for a woman of any age to go gray in the workforce? I mean, this is silly, but this is the conversation we're having today. I think it's true just as much for men and women to stay relevant. The women, that word resonates, I have found over the years. It's
Mm.
something that's very important in motivating their careers and their North Stars. Um, so I think that one of the hardest things, and it's equally true for men, is to figure out this new identity when you leave the workforce. And this notion that you've become a PIP. Do you know what a PIP is?
You're going to have to enlighten me.
A PIP is a previously important person. And
Ooh,
I love this term. I give credit to Robert Glazer. A previously important person is that person, and we all know plenty of people like this, who lives in the past, who lives in their glory days. It could be, the guy who's constantly telling you what a great football star he was in college, or the woman who talks about when I was CEO of, leading, 300,000 people, and now I'm just a previously important person. And how do you put that past behind you is a really uncomfortable inflection point for anyone leaving the workforce. I mean, we see it when people are in transition between jobs. They don't know how to introduce themselves in a way that they're comfortable with, right? So I think that we have to figure out, our as a retiring person, what's the identity that you want to have. And this is where it's really challenging for women. And we can circle back on this in other ways if you'd like, Charlie. Women care in general, and we know we're generalizing today.
that's right.
In general, women care a lot more about what everybody else says and thinks of them than men do.
Mm,
Men seem to brush
hmm
it off a lot more easily. And women are, I do think it's true, sometimes overly concerned with what other people think of them. So without that title or that role, that identity that is so wrapped up around our work, it may be a little bit of a different calculus for women. And so one of the examples I thought about for today is a physician. It happens to be a female physician that I work with, and who's figured out who would to adjust to this previously important person uh, term, if I may. So we advise this doctor and her husband on her retirement, and as we always do, Charlie, right, showing them what's possible. Could she retire at x age? And she was surprised to see she could retire even sooner than she planned, and she actually did, and is really happy about it. But at first she felt very adrift. She was no longer addressed as a doctor, right?
Yeah.
And then during the pandemic, people were informally asking her for lots of medical advice, right? Because she's a doctor. And she started second guessing her decision
Mm,
to stop practicing, like feeling like, I wish I was back in the swing of things, right?
hmm
Who And started to ask, like, who am I now? And one of the things I asked her to think about was, can we reframe this? And who is it you really want to be? And that was a little bit of a eye opener moment, at least for her, to say, kind of, wow, I got to put this past behind me. I'm not going back to practice. And she really didn't want to. It
hmm
reminded herself of all the reasons she left, but realized she could reframe the challenge and figure out, what do I really want to be and do. And one of my favorite things, among other things she's chose to do, is to play golf. And she said she would never play golf, right? So my other fun takeaway from this is, never say never, because things happen in retirement. You have more free time. You may think differently. Never say never. Be open.
That's exactly right. I think sometimes we create expectations for ourselves and we create a sort of anticipatory identity of what we're going to be in retirement. And I've seen this just like your doctor here. You never know what your life's going to look like. You never know what life's going to throw you. You never know what circumstances are going to come in place. Some good and some bad. We've seen a ton of people who are ready to launch out into this retirement world, and this is really relevant for women. suddenly are thrust in this caregiver mode
Mhm.
and are now in a place where they're having to care for family members, their aging parents, etc. I had one client of mine say, I was ready to go travel the world. Instead, I travel back and forth to doctor's offices, and I do it. I love my mom. I wouldn't trade this for the world because I'm able to pour into her the way she did me, but it's not what I had planned. And I think that this is probably an area that probably doesn't have enough planning around it because we kind of don't want to think about it. We don't want that to be what we're spending our time doing. But in many cases, that becomes a reality for many retirees and, for better, for worse, for many women as well. Have you seen that in your practice?
I have now. Some men fall into that situation as well, but
Certainly.
I have, and to your point, it really does derail whatever their dream was for perhaps their retirement. I've had clients, not take the vacations they wanted to take because they need to be locally. Clients have put off all sorts of things in order to care for aging parents, and it's just an unfortunate part of society. On the other hand, I always remind them how lucky their mom or dad are to have them,
That's
but
right.
it's a choice, right? Now it's
Hmm.
probably a really positive choice, but it's difficult. And I think that you're touching on something that I think is really another important point for women as they think about retirement and are in retirement is we're so used to working hard as the men are, right? And we're doing, and we're just doing. And women tend during the course of their careers to tamp down all the other things in their life beyond maybe work and family. And for in many cases, thinking about and actually leaving the workforce is the first time that the woman can put her own needs first. Um, and this is a challenge for many women and also a great opportunity. I think about it as put on your own oxygen mask first, right? What happens when you sitting on the tarmac on the plane and the pilot comes on, blah, blah, blah. Put on your mask before you reach for the child's mask next to yours, which always made me feel a little uncomfortable. But it's true in our career lives. We have, as women, tended to put everybody else's priorities first, including, there's many women who put off their health care because they're just too busy taking care of everyone else. So
Hmm.
I think that it's hard sometimes or how to say, in many cases, women can't wait to have that freedom to think about themselves, but it's also, you can't fill that gap, necessarily overnight, that there's a little bit of a hole there in terms of, well, gee, this is the first time I can really think about what I care about. And
Hmm.
so I think that it's really important in this case to think about, be open to new opportunities. Think of retirement as, before retirement and during retirement, as an adventure. You get a chance to experiment. I have seen clients retire and overcommit because they want to fill their days, and now they're on boards of different stripes, and they're on this committee and that committee, because they're very accomplished, previously important people, and attractive to other nonprofits as well as corporate entities. And the next thing you know, they're busier and maybe not in the ways that really bring them the most joy. So I think that it's a chance to step back and say, how do I really want to fill my day? And the way it looks in the first 90 days of retirement, the first couple of years of retirement, where it may be all, this is great. This is my honeymoon
Hmm.
phase. I get to do whatever
Hmm.
I want, and I'm finally doing the things I want to do. Maybe after a couple of years, you have that sugar crash where reality sets in and you say, wow, yes, my father used to say in retirement, every day is a Saturday. And that sounds so enticing, But, how many Saturdays with a blank calendar when you're used to being a pretty full calendar? How many Saturdays can you go through? I think it's important over time, early in retirement and maybe all through retirement, to kind of step back once in a while and think, just reassess, is this working for me and my family? If you have a spouse or a partner, you're not alone. Is it working? What would I change if I could? And back to your point of caregiving for a loved one, that could come in or leave at any moment. And so you need
Mm-hmm.
to be able to pivot. But I think it's a great time before one retires to think about, how do I envision, even though it may not look like that when I actually retire, what would give me joy? Not just stay busy,
Yeah.
what would give me joy?
Yeah. So let me ask you a bit of a personal question. As you've been advising clients for many years now, what would you maybe do different than maybe when you thought about, Jane, 15 years ago, when you thought about your own retirement? How different does that look now when you think about your rewirement eventually? Not trying to retire you anytime soon, don't get me wrong, but as you think about your own decision making, how is it maybe different and changed over time as you've watched so many people go through this journey?
That's a great question. I think I am always curious about what other people do and how they think about and make their own decisions. I mean, certainly when it comes to financial decisions, I like to understand, how do clients tick and how do they make decisions so that I can best help them make smart decisions going forward. And that extends to how they make decisions and act during their own periods. I've definitely learned from clients' feedback as they're very close to retirement and actually in the early stages of retirement about what they've learned. I had a client tell me just 2 weeks ago, we did help her and her husband retire, both of them from corporate America over the past year. And in meeting a couple of weeks ago, she said, when we have more time, I really got to tell you, like, it's quite different from what I imagined. And she said, in good ways and not so good ways. And I can tell
Hmm.
she's, still working through this adjustment, which is another really important observation I've seen, is it doesn't just happen. For some people, it happens more smoothly than others. Some people, as we all know, just naturally have a more positive disposition about life. That helps. We talk about what might make a retirement more successful. It helps if you just have a more positive attitude about life in general. But it's also, it's about resilience. There's no question that retirement, rewirement, whatever we want to call it, is a huge change. And
Yeah.
sometimes I've learned in talking to clients and observing their retirements over the years that it helps them to remember how they have managed through change in their life beforehand. And whether that's me reminding them, remember when you went from company A to company B, or remember when you shifted to a whole different industry, right? Remember when you had to take time off from work to care for a parent, right? Or your own health issue. Let's remember how strong you were and how resourceful you were. And sometimes people need to remember they can do this.
Mm.
What the this is, maybe yet to be defined, but they can do this. For me, look, 15 years goes by. I'm certainly closer to retirement than I was 15 years ago, but we're all going to retire at some point, hopefully by choice. We're all going to retire. And I look ahead too and think, what kind of areas, interests, connections with people would make my days more fulfilling, and where do I most want to steer my time? Not there yet. But
Yeah.
I think it is helpful to think about it and plan for it. And certainly you and I start from the financial ability to retire at a desired age. And then, this is all about layering in all the psychological side that often gets in the
Right.
way of people retiring. I mean, how many times have you shown a client they could have retired, years ago financially, and they know it and they want to, and they don't pull the trigger?
The financial side is the easy part, quite frankly. It's because that's the concrete side. We can show people exactly what they need to do. We can show people exactly how it's going to work. But people struggle in retirement not because of the money. They struggle because of all the other things that we've talked about today, whether it be identity or purpose or how you're going to spend your time, etc. Uh, the money doesn't solve those problems. The money can enhance your life, that it can improve your life and give you the tools that allow you to then go improve these areas that maybe you feel deficient in. But it takes preparation. And I think oftentimes people are focused so much on the money that they lose sight of preparing their life for what retirement looks like. That's the entire premise of why Retiring Well exists, is to help people focus on preparing for life in retirement. There's plenty of tools to help you prepare for the money. That's ad nauseum. You can find that, and we can help you with that in many, many ways. But helping people prepare for how they're going to deal with, as you mentioned, one of the largest transitions they're ever going to go through, and recognize that that's going to have an impact on them, and that you want to be able to be as prepared as you can, and then be nimble enough, as you've said many times, to make the decisions that's in your best interest and be able to sometimes just go with the flow. Life's going to throw you some stuff that you have
Sure.
not planned. And that's what I talk about with our clients all the time. The great thing about this plan is we have a plan. The bad thing about this plan is most of this is wrong because there's information we don't know that's going to come up a minute from now, a year from now, 10 years from now, that may change how we think about this. And the whole process of planning that we go through is what's so important. Let me kind of finish with a question. We're talking about women retiring well. What does that mean to you?
If I can just pick up on your point about the planning that we do and the planning that our clients need for their financial path, I find, I'm curious if you do as well, that one of the biggest challenges is we can show clients how much money they need and what kinds of accounts in order to know that they could stop working if that's their goal, right? My question always is, what's it all for?
Mm-hmm.
And especially when you're working with couples of any sort, one's idea of what the money's for may be different from the other's idea of what the money's for. And, how often I find myself facilitating the conversation in order to get an understanding of what is all this money that, we're helping to store, but importantly, they're working hard to accumulate. Go to the next stage and say, well, what do you really want it to do for you? And I
Right.
find that one spouse may say, well, I really want to travel and I want to do A, B, and C. And the other one says, okay, but I really want to help steer money towards the kids or the grandchildren's educations and really support the family. And you know how these things play out. And so we have to
Mm-hmm.
find some common ground. And one of the most fun things sometimes is to do this exercise. And we all have different frameworks we could use, but do an exercise to help people take the time out of their busy lives to figure out what is it all for? What are their priorities for spending all this money that they are working so hard to accumulate? And then seeing a couple or whoever we're advising, seeing them go in the course of discussing this, probably for the first time, uh, and seeing them go from those burrowed frowns to kind of like a smile on each of their faces, like, oh, we've kind of figured this out. We've got enough common ground to work with. And so I think part of our roles, and one I relish, is helping people dream, but more like really envision what it's for. And to your point, knowing that it's not going to play out exactly the way it shows out
Yeah.
on the paper. So I think for women, let me share something that was really interesting. Thinking about this discussion today, Charlie, I went and Googled women in retirement in different ways, but women in retirement. And what kinds of things come up? It's all about women have less money in retirement. Women are going to live longer. They haven't saved enough. They don't have the financial wherewithal, and it's got a very
Mm-hmm.
negative connotation.
Mm-hmm.
And it occurred to me that there's really no resources, at least just in a simple Google search, no resources really aimed at the psychological side, and maybe the positive, constructive aspects of helping a woman think about retirement as other than, you're going to be in trouble, you know,
Yeah.
and think about the kinds of women that we work with. They're not all, homemakers. They're not all um, people who are already in retirement and understand that they may outlive their husbands. And so I think we can do a great service to help fill in the gaps for women in retirement about, let's help them think about it just like the men do, right? Which we're used to doing in our careers. What are some of the tricks of the trades, and how have men solved some of these challenges in different ways? But we can also be there to help them envision. So this gets a little bit to, I think, a challenge for women in many ways is we don't have a lot of role models as we think about retirement. Career women, there haven't been nearly enough of them for enough decades for us to actually observe and have role models about what does a good
That's a good point.
retirement look like for me. We have lots of men, but it would be great if we had and could showcase more role models and examples so that women can say, oh, I can picture that. Or that's not what I want. I want X instead. And so I think it's very similar to our careers where we don't necessarily or haven't for a long time necessarily had a wealth of role models. So how can we help fill that gap?
That is a very interesting point. It almost makes me wonder, similar to the workforce, I know there's a concept called sponsorship that comes up a lot in the workforce, especially with women and helping women's careers along. And I wonder if there's a space now for that to be the case in retirement as well, as people are sort of off ramping again, and having some of these folks who have gone ahead serving in many cases as sponsors of those who are doing that. To me, they're I, I'm certainly not the one to lead that charge, but I think there's an opportunity to talk to our clients about that and say, who are the people that you would love to mentor, maybe in the same way that you did in their careers, helping them to transition to this new life and just share what you've gone through. Anyway,
I,
that's
I,
something that kind of comes to mind.
I love that because there are so many parallels to retirement from our working lives, not just men, not just women, but men too.
Right.
How do we think about making a big change in our careers, a job change, a role change, whatever it is? How do we think about doing that? What are we all really good at? We do our homework. We go out and we ask people. We interview people. Um, we ask them for advice and insights and their lessons learned. And that's the same way I think we can all help ourselves plan for and have a more successful retirement, retire well by planning ahead, asking questions, doing our research. I mean, it's the same skill set so many of us use in our working lives. And I don't think you need to shut that off just because you're no longer in the workforce. Um, so I do think there's some specific challenges for women, and we've highlighted a few of them today. And one of the important points I just want to make sure I don't leave off is, and this has helped me help advise clients, but I keep it in mind for myself too, which is it really we ask what makes a more successful retirement. It really helps if you're not just retiring from something,
Hmm.
but you're also retiring to something. So some of the best success stories of men and women I've worked with are when they have had all these outside interests they've either already pursued or they know once they're able to, they will pursue. They've already envisioned at least the early stages of retirement and also maybe teed up the kinds of we think of it as network in our working world, but connections, the social connections. Who do I need to get to know in order to do that? Who do I want to hang out with? Who's playing pickleball or bridge now that I maybe could join that group or start my own group, so that I have something in place already. Now, not everybody can do that when they're working 24/7, I realize. But if we can kind of say, well, what would it look like if I dialed down from a 10? I've always been a 10, right? We're going, going, going. If I dial down to a 9 or even an 8 or a 7, and how would I feel? How would I like to fill that time? And get started if you can while you're still working, and you'll smooth out the transition, hopefully.
Well, that's a perfect last word. You had a couple of nuggets here that I wrote down that don't want to I want to make sure everyone hears. I mean, obviously, you don't have to stay in the same lane. I love that one. Have a plan, but make it in pencil. I love that one as well. So both of these are about having some flexibility and maybe even taking the risk
Yes.
of coming out of your comfort zone, which was your other one. Get out of your comfort zone. We have to be the CEO of our own career, but we should also now be the CEO of our own retirement. I love the PIP, the previously important person. I'm sure we can all relate to that at different phases in our life. I used to be a football player. I was a PIP, and I am no longer that.
Everybody knew who Charlie Jordan was.
That's right. That's right. You had those moments. You have your glory days along the way, and that transition is really important because I know a lot of clients that were a PIP in their career. Now they're a PIP to their grandkids, a PIP to the community, etc. So you can always reinvent yourself. I know this is a big part of your entire career, but this idea of what's possible, I love that. That sort of dreaming, but also goes into the envisioning side of what we do. Putting your own mask on first, putting your own oxygen mask on first, and making sure that you've taken care of yourself and what you need to do. When historically and maybe by nature, women especially are taking care of others first. Retirement being sort of in many cases the first chance to kind of really focus on, what do I really want? That's a huge one. What's all the money for? I think that's really good. I think sometimes we focus too much on just maximizing.
Yes.
We just want to grow and maximize. What's the point? What's the purpose? Because we make very different decisions if we tie purpose behind all of our money. And then finally, what makes a successful retirement? You have to retire to something, not from something. And I think many times people are just they're just worn out and they're just trying to be done with what they're doing. And they may not even need to, quote, retire. They may need to, as I've talked about, take the off ramp, go from 80 to 60, maybe not 80 to 0. I used to say that if you're going 80 miles an hour down the interstate and suddenly you're going 0, something bad happened, right? There's collateral damage around. Yes. And there's a wreck. Find a way, if you can, to slow it down and find your right pace. But Jane, I just want to thank you so much. This was incredibly valuable. I know our listeners are going to love it, and just always enjoy getting to talk to you. And so glad that you are my partner.
And right back at you. And I really thank you for this opportunity. And it's a fun conversation to have with you about retiring well. So thanks, Charlie, so much.
It's really important to recognize that your individual situation is unique to you, and that anything we discuss today should not be considered legal or tax or investment advice. But you may have heard this podcast and have questions or want to talk to someone about your personal situation. We have ways you can connect with our team. If you'd like to connect with an advisor or have any questions for us to answer here on the podcast in a future listener question episode, you can shoot us an email at retiringwell@brightworth.com. Also, one of my favorite things we offer is the Retiring Well Connection. It's a monthly email newsletter. It covers all areas of life and retirement, both the money side and the personal side. And we search for great content all over the web, pull together 3 to 4 pieces each month, whether that's a podcast, article, book recommendation, etc. Pull together things that we think our readers and our listeners will find interesting and valuable. So there's a link to subscribe to that in the show notes. So make sure you get your Retire Well connection each month. And finally, you're going to hear us reference the elements of retirement frequently around here. We've developed a tool to help you think through what matters most to you in life, in retirement, and where you can prioritize your financial decision making to retire well. So to get your copy of what we call the 10 Elements of Retirement Self-Assessment, see the link in the show notes. If you enjoyed this podcast, please help us by rating and subscribing so you don't miss any future episodes. That's all for us today. I'm Charlie Jordan. Have a great day.